Now do your very best impersonation of a German aristocrat's formal greeting. No, Eggsy.
The Kingsman movies are definitely some of the more interesting and unique comic book films to come out of Hollywood in the last decade. The first two take the spy world of 007 and place it in a modern setting while ramping up the stakes, the action, the espionage, the conspiracies, all while sporting an R rating with some intense and insane action set pieces and some really slick stylish editing. Add on a layer of humor and a cast of some good likable actors, and you got yourself the Kingsman movies. It plays into the spy genre tropes and has fun with it, and even acknowledges it a few times.
You like spy movies, Mr. DeVere?
Nowadays, they're all a little serious for my taste. The old ones. Marvelous. Give me a far-fetched theatrical plot any day.
And again, I'm always reminded from that quote from Zack Snyder about having fun but not making fun.
Have fun but don't make fun. Be reverent to the genre, but also push it.
And really that's what these films set out to do. Well, the first two do at least. They more so harken back to the fun spy movies from decades ago, while the third one takes a very different approach that's basically part historical fiction, part period piece, and part war movie. I think it's pretty fascinating, but I'll talk more about that later. For now, I want to start from the beginning and talk about each one of these movies and get my thoughts on them, discuss what worked, what didn't, and how they were received upon release. And I'm going to be upfront and tell you guys beforehand that I think each one of these movies are good, but I know that's not what everyone thinks. So I want to acknowledge the issues and tell you guys how I think this franchise could have been something truly great, instead of the pretty good but kind of mixed bag that it currently is.
If you save the world, we can do it in the asshole.
I'll be right back.
But first, I want to talk a little bit about the man behind these movies, Mathew Vaughn. I think he's always been a pretty underappreciated director. He did good work on Kick-Ass and X-Men First Class, but I think these Kingsman movies are kind of his crown jewels. But first, let's rewind the clock back to before the Kingsman movies or even the comics released. Mathew Vaughn and comic book writer Mark Millar were talking about how serious spy movies have gotten and how they aren't really that much fun anymore. They just saw Casino Royale, and even though they thought it was a good movie, they missed the more fun, over-the-top spy movies of the older Bond films. They noticed a gap in the market for more eccentric, over-the-top, fun spy films with far-fetched plots and very fun villains. And they held on to this feeling and idea for years, until the Kingsman comics were released in 2012, going by the title The Secret Service, created by his friend and creator of Kick-Ass, Mark Millar, and art by Dave Gibbons. Vaughn now saw an opportunity to take this graphic novel and use it as the backbone for a spy movie with fun action set pieces, quirky gadgets, and really just to have a good old-fashioned fun time. Ironically, it's actually pretty similar to Kick-Ass, whereas the comic wasn't around long before they started working on the adaptation. Mathew Vaughn wasted no time trying to get this movie made, and jumped on it immediately. And having done a good job adapting Mark Millar's previous comic Kick-Ass, along with the success from X-Men First Class, he was able to secure a budget between $80 to $90 million from 20th Century Fox, and thus production was quickly underway. Really looking back on it, you can tell Mathew Vaughn really likes these movies and the concept, because unlike Kick-Ass and X-Men First Class, he's actually done all three of these films, not just one and dipped out for the sequel, so he's dedicated. So with a little history lesson out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the movies themselves, starting with Kingsman The Secret Service. Oh, and there will be spoilers for all three of these films, so if you haven't seen them, I highly recommend you check them out. You ready? Let's get into it. Released in 2014, Kingsman The Secret Service follows the story of Eggsy, a street kid who's going nowhere in life and is wasting his potential. But he gets the chance to join a secret organization called the Kingsmen. So he becomes a protege to Harry, a friend of his deceased father who was also a Kingsman. But while training, a billionaire named Valentine starts cooking up a scheme that threatens the entire world. So he must be stopped. And what better way to do it than with some glorious over-the-top violence. Now you might think I'm crazy, but this is one of the rare cases where I have zero complaints about the film. I'm serious, after rewatching it, I can honestly say that I don't have any problems with it. It's actually kind of weird because usually when I go back to rewatch a movie I haven't seen in years, I notice things that didn't stick out to me before, or I start to see the flaws when I look at it with a more critical lens. But that wasn't the case here. In fact, I found more things about it that I like. There's only a handful of movies where this has happened. So really, I'm just going to be telling you guys why this movie is so great, and why audiences loved it when it was released. Let's get the obvious out of the way first. This movie is a blast. The action is fun, creative, and very well choreographed. Is it a bit over the top? Sure, but it pulls it off with such style and flair that you really don't care. And it doesn't pull you out of the movie with how silly it gets. If anything, you're just more sucked in. Are we going to talk about the church fight scene? Let's talk about the church fight scene.
This some serious gourmet shit.
There isn't anything new that I can add to this conversation. There are dozens of videos breaking down this scene alone that explain how they pulled this off. They use some creative editing tricks, as well as some good special effects and CGI, to stitch these scenes together to make it look like it's a very long, uninterrupted take. Well, besides the few times where it cuts away to other characters watching. But still, it's very well done. And of course, the fight choreography itself is top notch, and the way the camera moves and follows the action action is perfect. It does sway and move around, but it's never super shaky or feels disorienting. It remains steady enough to where you can see it all clearly. It's an insanely violent and crazy scene, and you really just gotta experience it for yourself. All the action in the movie in general is great, and they all share the same elements of being fun, violent, and creative, as well as being well shot. Honestly, the action alone is worth checking this movie out, but lucky for us, the characters are also good. Eggsy, Harry, Merlin, and Roxy are all great. All easily likable and understandable characters. Hell, even the few scenes with Michael Caine and Mark Hamill are good. Eggsy and Harry are definitely the standouts, which is good because the story mainly revolves around them, and they start to form this teacher-student relationship, and goddammit, I like seeing them on screen interacting with each other. Eggsy is the brash young punk who is much smarter than he leads on, and Harry sees the potential in him and is trying to make him see what he sees in him. He's friendly and offers advice, but he is still very stern. And honestly, you kind of feel the same way Harry does watching Eggsy throughout the movie. Eggsy is rough around the edges, but you want to see him succeed. But what's a good hero without a good villain? And that's where Samuel Jackson comes in. He plays a rich billionaire named Valentine, who is really like an evil Bill Gates. Sam Jackson is always entertaining, and here it's no different. It's not a deep, complex, Oscar-winning role. It's a villain with a crazy plan to wipe out mankind to save the planet, with a weird and quirky personality, and he is just so much fun to watch. He also talks with a list. Why? More like, why not? This shit's a little absurd, but it's also really fun. Now, with such a good cast like this, it's no surprise that the characters come across as entertaining and likable, because all the actors playing them are really good. So yeah, thumbs up from me. The pacing is also damn near perfect. No scene felt like filler and no parts dragged. Even when there weren't any awesome action set pieces on screen, you're still hooked because the characters are so entertaining. And the way the structure works is that it bounces between Eggsy's training, Harry investigating Valentine, and Valentine furthering his schemes, until eventually they merge together. No time feels wasted. Something is always happening to move the plot and characters along. It's a balancing act that I think it pulls off pretty well. Oh, and the music is also pretty good. It's fun and upbeat, but also when they use licensed tracks, it just elevates things to a whole new level of fun. Mathew Vaughn likes to do that a lot, placing awesome songs to some fun action scenes, like he did in Kick-Ass. Some people might say that it's a cheap way to get people to enjoy the movie, because there's a popular song that most people have heard of playing, but you know what I gotta say to that?
Fuck you, hating ass nigga! Don't nobody give a fuck what your dumb ass think!
The movie is setting out to be fun and over the top, so it really fits. Really, the only way I can see someone not enjoying this movie is if they A, don't like the genre, or B, they don't like the less serious and more goofy and comedic approach. Or maybe they just don't like fun, who knows. And that's the movie's goal at the end of the day, to have some fun and harken back to the spy movies of old, while putting a fresh modern twist on it. The movie has some winks, nods, and references to other spy films, all while being an over-the-top fun spy film. It plays into a lot of the old tropes, but it also subverts your expectations a few times and delivers some surprises. The biggest one being Harry's death. Not only was it surprising, but it was really effective because, damn, Harry was awesome and his relationship with Eggsy was great. So to see him actually get killed was a shock, instead of getting captured and making a daring escape like Valentine jokingly suggested. Another small thing that actually took me by surprise was the fact that Eggsy doesn't end up with Roxy. They build a relationship throughout the movie, but it never gets romantic, and instead Eggsy ends up banging this princess. Typically in a lot of movies, these two probably would have gotten together, but here they don't and just remain friends. It kind of reminds me of the ending of Blade, where you think they're gonna get together, but nope, doesn't happen, which is a good thing. There's no forced romance at all. So it plays into and acknowledges a lot of the tropes of the genre, but it also has a few surprises in store and subverts your expectations a few times. Guys, there really isn't much more I can say besides, this movie is goated, and it was very successful, bringing in over $400 million at the box office, and garnering some pretty positive reviews from both audiences and critics. It had many excited to see where it would go from here. It laid a solid foundation, and had people wanting to see it explored and expanded upon, and it had the potential of being a new spy franchise that would serve as like a counterbalance to the more serious ones like Mission Impossible and modern day 007. It really felt fresh for the time, and basically pumps some new blood into the genre, similar to what John Wick did the same year with action films. Audiences were surprised and impressed, and they wanted more. And 3 years later, that's what they got.
Hey, what's up, guys? Y'all cool?
Released in 2017, The Golden Circle is set 1 year after the events of the previous movie, and once again follows Eggsy. This time he's a more experienced Kingsman agent, but that doesn't matter because the entire organization gets taken out by the international drug cartel called the Golden Circle, who is led by a woman named Poppy. But thankfully Eggsy and Merlin get the help from a secret American organization called the Statesmen. Now they must join forces and find the Golden Circle and stop their plan to kill hundreds of millions of people, in the most over-the-top and violent way possible, of course. Now basically the goal of this sequel was to up the ante and go even bigger with the action and get even more out there with the world-threatening plot. And in that area, it definitely succeeds. A lot of the stunts and action sequences are even crazier, and they survive some even more bizarre life-threatening situations. And there's even more fun gadgets from both the Kingsman and Statesmen. The movie without a doubt goes big. And on the filmmaking side, the camera work is also really improved, with some really impressive cinematography and several impressive transitions. And they do that trick from the church fight scene, where they edit together several scenes to make it look like a longer take. This of course involves some really good special effects, CGI, and some creative camera work. They do it several times throughout the film, and it looks pretty damn cool. whimsical and pretty solid. The cast is just as likable as before. They're played by some very good actors, so again, it's no surprise the characters are entertaining. Eggsy, Harry, and Merlin are definitely the standouts, which also isn't surprising. The villain this time around is played by Julianne Moore, and the character's name is Poppy, and she's just having a blast. She plays the leader of the world's biggest drug cartel, called the Golden Circle, and she has a very upbeat attitude, and she hides out in the forest amongst ancient ruins that she decked out with retro 50s aesthetic. It's pretty nuts and I love it. And the music again is good, but this time they incorporate some country music because of the inclusion of the Statesman, and it's fun as hell. Really, in a lot of ways, this movie is good because it has a lot of the same stuff that made the first one great. The awesome and creative action sequences, a cast of good actors playing some entertaining characters, a quirky and weird villain that has an insane plan to wipe out humanity. So it feels very familiar, and takes a lot of things from the first film and just ramps it up. But the biggest issue is that it tries to do a lot of things, but unfortunately it doesn't all work, and several things feel tacked on and feel really underbaked. I mean, you got meeting the Statesman, Harry dealing with amnesia, the Golden Circle's evil plan, Eggsy and his girlfriend's relationship, and even a very small thing about Merlin and Ginger going out into the field. And then towards the end, right before the final battle, Pedro Pascal's character does a monologue where he reveals why he doesn't want to stop the evil plan, with no real build-up. Hell, even Elton John is in the movie and helps out during the climax. Basically, there's just a lot of stuff happening here, and it doesn't balance it all that well. I mean, realistically, the small plot with Merlin could have been cut out. So could have Eggsy's relationship issues, so that more time could have been given to Pedro Pascal's character, so that his twist reveal didn't feel so out of left field. There's just so much happening in this movie that it doesn't feel as tightly put together as before, and several things just aren't given that much attention, so they feel underbaked. They clearly want to go bigger and be more shocking than the first, so they have crazier action scenes, more plot lines happening, and more character deaths. Many think that things get a bit too ridiculous, even by Kingsman standards, which I understand. The plot and story and action is even more out there than the first one was. And maybe it's an acquired taste, because even though it's very out there, it didn't take me out of the movie and I still enjoyed it. The first action scene in the movie kind of prepared me for how crazy it was going to get, so I really didn't mind it. I've actually seen several people say that it feels closer to like a superhero movie than it does a spy action film, which I kind of see, because some of this shit is pretty out there, and the characters are only human but they somehow survive it. Now, even though I just listed off many of its issues, I still gotta admit that I really enjoyed this movie. Sure, it's not as good as the first, but I still found it to be a very good time, and I really enjoyed seeing them pushing what they could do in terms of action and sheer scope with the story, to see how ridiculous and crazy they can make it. To some, it may go a bit too far in that department, and I understand that, but even though I'm fully aware of these issues, I really can't hate this movie. It's just too damn fun and creative, and I personally enjoyed the inclusion of the Statesman. It shows you that the Kingsmen aren't the only secret organization around, and I honestly love the opening fight scene. They're fighting in the back of a car during a chase. Not just inside the car, outside the car, on top of the car. It's fucking bonkers. And the ending when they're attacking Poppy's base is pretty insane. Are these sections pretty damn ridiculous even by Kingsman standards? Yes, but damn it, I love it. Even though it has its shortcomings, I really can't hate this movie. It's just too much fun. Honestly though, the worst thing about it is that we didn't get more Channing Tatum. He had a good introduction, but then he's sidelined throughout the whole movie, which is a shame. He appears again at the end rolled up to the Kingsman shop in a suit, obviously teasing a sequel. And if they ever make a follow-up to this, I would love to see him in it.
My name is Jeff.
So the Golden Circle was just as successful as the first upon its release, financially anyway. Again, bringing in over $400 million at the box office, but this time the reviews were more mixed. People described it as being disappointing, and not as well put together as the previous film, which is understandable. In their goal to go bigger than the first, they kind of lost their way, and the film just wasn't as focused and polished. This made many worried about a potential sequel. Maybe the first film was just a lightning in a bottle that couldn't be replicated, but then rumors and news about Mathew Vaughn working on a third Kingsman movie started to pop up, and then in 2021, we got another installment.
And your name? Adolf Hitler.
Let's go!
Released in 2021, The Kingsman is a prequel that takes place during World War I and touches on the events that helped form the Kingsman organization, as well as giving a fictional behind-the-scenes account leading up to and during World War I, where a shadowy figure called the Shepherd pulled the strings that caused one of the biggest wars in history. So we follow an English aristocrat named Oxford who pulls his forces together to try to end the war, all while butting heads with his son who wants to be recruited and join the war. The Kingsman is a very interesting movie because, unlike the previous two, it's much more grounded and serious, and it uses real-world events during World War I as its setting and plot points. You see the assassination that started the war, you see the death of Kitchener and Rasputin, as well as the appearance of several other historical figures. Hell, you even see some trench warfare right on the front lines. Of course, it takes liberty with it all, but it's still pretty interesting how they took the story they're telling about this big evil man in the shadows orchestrating it all, and did a pretty decent job at tying it to these real-world events and figures. So it's like one part historical fiction and one part war movie. But at the heart of it all is the story of a father trying to keep his son out of the war. And there are some interesting points and conversations about one's reputation, character, and honor. It's some pretty interesting stuff, and the movie does a good job explaining where each one is coming from. The father, Oxford, was in the military, but after years of fighting, he became a pacifist, and instead joined the Red Cross to help people. And after the death of his wife, he became overprotective of his son, and his son, Conrad, wants to join the war because he feels it's the honorable and right thing to do, and that he shouldn't be sitting on the sidelines doing nothing. And of course, his father doesn't want him to go, and does everything in his power to ensure his son's safety. This is a big part of the movie, and it touches on it a lot, and I found it to be very interesting, and I like seeing their conflicting views. So yeah, the evil figure in the shadows pulling the strings to start the First World War is a bit far-fetched, but it was very interesting how they connected it to real-world events. But I found the conflict between the father and son to be very interesting and definitely one of the stronger aspects of the film. And something I like is that even though it's a prequel, you don't need prior knowledge to understand it. It stands on its own, and you can watch it without having seen the other films. There are a few little winks here and there, but it doesn't take away from the overall experience or feel forced. So that's something that I can really appreciate. And the action here is pretty solid, but like I said earlier, this is a more serious and grounded approach. So that means that the action sequences are scaled down from the previous two films. So there aren't any crazy or quirky gadgets, and the fight scenes are less bombastic and over the top. The funniest and weirdest one was with Rasputin, but it's not as crazy as some of the other stuff in the first two. And there are actually a few scenes that show some trench warfare, and it's pretty dark. Overall, there's some pretty good action, but there's nothing really that memorable or mind-blowing like the church fight scene from the first film or the opening fight scene in the second. Now, as far as the filmmaking goes, the movie is Mathew Vaughn in top form, at least in terms of cinematography and camera work. It's very solid. There's a lot of smooth and creative transitions. It's really impressive that they never stop improving with each film. They always find a way to be more creative and push what they did before, at least in terms of the visuals. Sadly, the action isn't as creative as the stuff in the first two, but regardless, it's still a very well-made movie, and I was thoroughly entertained throughout. But there are definitely a few shortcomings. The story really takes a bit to get going, with the first 15 to 20 minutes really spent setting things up, and several of the characters just aren't that memorable, with Oxford and his son being the only really interesting ones, and Rasputin being the most entertaining. I think Shola is the most underutilized. He's played by an awesome actor whose name I can't pronounce, and I wish he had more moments to really shine and stand out. And as far as the villain goes, the Shepherd is the most uninteresting one in the series so far. He's very one note, and not nearly as fun or entertaining as Valentine or Poppy, which I guess fits because they are going for a more grounded approach. But when his identity was revealed, it was all dramatic, but I was like, wait, who are you? Not to say any of the characters are bad, I just don't think any of them are as entertaining as the ones in the previous films. And they have a very solid cast of actors here, but no one really stands out or shines. But once the film got going, I found the story between the father and son really interesting, and I liked seeing how they bend and tweaked real world events. The action, though not as creative and crazy as before, was still very solid. And the cinematography, of course, is good, and overall I liked the darker, more serious tone. It made for a different experience than what I was used to in a Kingsman movie, and honestly I didn't mind the change. So I know it's not the popular opinion, but I still really enjoyed the movie and I liked it a lot.
This is the deadest I ever seen.
So this third entry didn't perform well at all, bringing in a little over $100 million on a $100 million budget, making it a flop. There's a few reasons I can think of for the film's failure, some out of the film's control, but one about the film itself. Let's start with what they couldn't control. The film was delayed a few times. The first was during the Disney acquisition of Fox in 2019, that delayed the release while that stuff was getting sorted out. Then during 2020, some kind of sickness hit the world, causing another delay, pushing the release date back all the way until the end of 2021. And the cherry on top was the lack of advertising. Like, I honestly can't remember seeing any trailers for this movie anywhere. It's like Disney wanted to release it just to get rid of it, and they didn't really care that much about it at all. So whatever hype or interest there was just gone after 2 delays and no real advertising, which is a shame because I think it's a very well made and entertaining movie. But I know I'm in the minority when it comes to liking this film, which leads me to another major reason for its failure: the lack of fan interest. To many fans, this isn't really what they wanted from a Kingsman movie. The first two were essentially just modern day 007 with all the tropes and over the top fun action, but this was a more serious and grounded prequel set during World War I. It's not exactly the direction that many wanted the series to take, so many fans were just turned off by the idea and either didn't like it or didn't bother checking it out. Though when looking at review scores, the critic scores are below average, but the audience scores are very positive, so it appears that many people did enjoy it. But it's very clear by the box office numbers that there were just many people who didn't even bother checking this movie out, and that could be a mixture of them not knowing that it even existed due to delays and poor advertising, or just having no interest in it because they weren't liking the direction it was going in. Me personally, I would like to see a follow-up to this set during World War II like the end credits scene teased.
If you're feeling suicidal, you've come to the right place.
So, here we are, 8 years and 3 entries later, with a fan base that seems pretty divided, with many arguing that the Kingsman kind of lost steam and hype. Mostly all agree that the first film was great, but most seem to be pretty mixed on the sequels, and when looking back, it's no surprise really. The first had a great foundation to build a franchise on, the world was very interesting, and the movie was filled with so much fun and energy, and even though it was out there, it wasn't too absurd, and it really could have served as like a counter to modern 007 and Mission Impossible films, or even just a new modern action franchise franchise for the new generation, similar to what John Wick did. But it seemed each movie went to a different direction that quickly split the fans. The first harkened back to spy films of old, playing into the old tropes and having fun with it, while telling a fairly straightforward story, while the second went too far over the top and got too goofy for most fans. And in their attempt to go bigger, the film lost focus and wasn't as polished as the first. And then the third took a hard left turn to a more serious, grounded direction that was part historical fiction and part war movie, mostly dropping the humor and high intense action that series was known for, further dividing the fans. While I enjoy each one of these movies for what they are, I can see why many people just lost interest in it. And looking back, maybe the first one was lightning in a bottle that came out at the right time and was so perfectly crafted that no other entry would ever be able to top it. I think the pieces were definitely there for this to be the next big franchise in Hollywood, and it showed a lot of promise, showing viewers that there was more you can do with comic book movies and spy films, giving a fresh and interesting take on the genre. But the direction each film went in drastically changed how fans viewed and enjoyed the films, and many just kind of moved on. So the Kingsman had the makings of being a truly great new franchise, but after 3 entries, it mostly became a mixed bag, and the amount of praise or criticism each film gets varies a lot between fans. Now, I would love to see this franchise continue, and would be perfectly happy with at least 2 more entries, one set during World War II, and another taking place after the Golden Circle. They would serve as like a nice break from other types of comic book movies from the big 2, and I'm curious where they can take this franchise. Mathew Vaughn is very dedicated, and there is a 4th entry in the works following Harry and Eggsy again, called Kingsman Blue Bloods, set to release sometime in 2023. And he has mentioned in the past that they have several ideas for sequels and spin-offs, so I guess we're gonna have to wait and see how this turns out. And maybe the 4th film will be the one that gets everybody back on board. But until then, that's gonna do it for the video, guys, so I hope you enjoyed. If you did, drop a like on it, and leave a comment, let me know, what do you think about the Kingsman movies? Do you like them? Do you hate them? Leave a comment, let me know. And I'll give a nice big shout out to the channel members. If you guys are interested in becoming a channel member, click the join button down below to check out the perks. If they interest you, consider joining, or not, it don't matter.
None of this matters.
Alright, let's just get this over with.
I'm gay.
You're a boy in a man's world. And I'm a man who loves to play with boys. Register what I meant to say is you're a boy and I'm a man. And tonight I'm going to rob the man from you. You remember this, pal. You're a boy and I'm a man. When you and I get together here tonight, I'm going to do a lot of you.